Hello everyone and welcome back to a brand new podcast where today we return with episode 96 of Knowing Wheel. We're back, it's Tuesday once again, and of course as always I'm joined by Jamie183. How are we doing, mate?
I'm good. We're deep into F1 off season, so we'll do our best to bring you all the latest, but there really isn't much to say about this week, so we'll have some fun anyway, I'm sure.
Yeah, it has been a very... I mean, like Jamie said, it's F1 off-season. The views are down. I'm going to be on the streets very soon. This is the first January off-season I'm having to try and survive as a full-time content creator. It isn't very fun. We did think about trying to do a bit of a normal podcast this week, sort of just going over news stories and things like that from the last week in the world of Formula 1. But literally the only thing we could really talk about was that Alfa Romeo Sauber have confirmed their car release date, which, if I remember correctly, Jamie, I forgot what date it is.
I think it's the 7th.
We believe it is the 7th
of
February as well. Of course, like we said, we are going to be aiming, or we're going to try and cover as many of the car releases as we can. Jamie's actually away on holiday for some of it, so there might be a couple that are just me.
You can just get a screenshot of my face and stick it next to you.
I will be getting the screenshot of Jamie's
give
face.
As good insight as I usually do.
It probably will. You're absolutely right. So yeah, if you do enjoy the podcast though, as always, if you're watching on YouTube, please do click the links down in the description below as well, of course, to Twitter, YouTube. This is obviously the Clips channel, TikTok, Instagram as well, and of course Spotify. But also I'm going to try finally now and get this released on Apple Podcast as well, for those of you on iOS. So yeah, greatly appreciate if you could give us a follow. But yeah, today we decided then, of course, for those of you that sort of are around the Matt212 YouTube channel anyway, I've been running a poll recently discussing Formula 1's most iconic car. And now there were a couple of caveats to that. I limited it down to just championship winners. Otherwise, I was probably going to end up with about 700 different options for cars that could be deemed iconic. Of course, that poll is still currently ongoing over on the YouTube channel. So, if you want to go vote on that, head over to the community tab on my YouTube channel. But Jamie and I decided, a bit like we did with the best ever Formula 1 driver, we're going to go through. Now, if you remember, Jamie, back to that best ever F1 driver, we actually came out with a different result to what the Matt212 community voted. Do we think that's going to happen again?
I actually don't know what the result... Well, it's still ongoing, isn't it? You just said. So it probably will, to be honest, because obviously when you give anything to a bunch of people, it's unsure if you should trust their decision, their outcome. Democracy is interesting at sometimes, especially people on YouTube, where there's no consequence really. They just vote for the first one they see. But that's not what I'm saying. No
consequence seems a bit strict, but
I think this isn't called Knowing Wheel for nothing. So we will clearly know above average. Since didn't Sebastian Vettel become like one of the fourth of all time or something in your community?
He was ranked inside. He was ranked better than Alain Prost in it. Hamilton was voted as the best driver of all time, which I think is fair, which is perfectly fair. But we've got 16 cars then. Like I said, it is exactly the same 16 that we've been doing over on the community tab. So running in, I'm going to try and do it in age order from oldest to newest. We've got the Mercedes W196, of course, that led Fangio to 2 world titles in 1955 and 1956. We've got the Brabham BT19 from 1966, of course, famous for being won by Jack Brabham, of course, the only Formula 1 car to bear the name of its champion in its name. We've got the Ferrari 412T, which I just realised I put the T2 date on there. It is actually the car from 1975 that led Niki Lauda to his first Formula 1 World Championship. We've got the Williams FW07B from 1981. We have got the McLaren MP4-4 from 1988. We have then got the Benetton the Williams FW14B from 92. The Benetton B195 from 1995. Then we've got the McLaren MP4-13 from 1998. The Ferrari F2002, the Ferrari F2004, the Renault R25, the Braun BGP 001, the Red Bull RB9, the Mercedes W07 and W11, and last but not least, the Red Bull RB18. That was a mouthful.
That was a lot of numbers and letters. Well done for getting through it without
Thank you
choking.
Very much. So, let's just get into it then. I mean, what we'll probably do, of course, is talk about each of these cars' historical, significance when we get into them. First round, Jamie, I was quite surprised by this, is actually the oldest car going up against the newest. It's the Mercedes W196 going up against the Red Bull RB18.
Yes, and I think my initial thought of this is kind of the Red Bull this year generally, until the second half of the season, wasn't actually that much faster than the rest of the field. It was probably in super times up until the summer break, just behind the Ferrari, I would imagine, this year. So for me, the Mercedes has to win this, I think.
I was thinking exactly the same. It might instantly be quite an unpopular opinion because, of course, again, YouTube generally tends to have a recency bias. But the Mercedes W196, of course, before Brawn, was the last car from a new team to win on debut. Of course, Mercedes were a mighty powerhouse anyway. They convinced Fangio to leave, I think it was Alfa Romeo at the time, to come to Mercedes halfway through the season to drive the new 196. It was also famous in its, I cannot quite, in the aerodynamic, the sleek version of the car, I can't quite remember the name of it off the top of my head, to feature closed wheels. And of course, like we said, won 2 world titles. It was the only team Fangio won 2 world titles with.
Yeah, he was a bit of a team hopper back in the 50s, to be fair. But I do think, if you haven't seen a picture of this car, it is insane. It's so cool. I think Lewis Hamilton did a feature with it in 2020-ish, maybe?
Yes, yeah.
Which was just incredible. Sky Sports YouTube channel probably has it, so go and check it out if you haven't. And yeah, the Red Bull, in terms of numbers, is probably I think it is statistically the most successful car in terms of wins, but obviously much longer seasons now. And it was massively helped by an incredible driver at the top of his game. So
just like the W196.
Yeah, because in the 50s the driver made much more of a difference, I suppose. But I do think that in terms of outright speed and how ahead of its time it was, the Red Bull was not that much ahead of the Ferrari, certainly. And by the end of the year, we saw, Brazil, basically, Mercedes, and I guess Zandvoort, other tracks like that, Mercedes were kind of there as well. So I don't think the Red Bull can win this round.
And I mean, this is the thing, isn't it, as well, of course, you mentioned, the Red Bull took, how many was it, 17 or 18 wins?
Max got 15 and Checo got 2, I believe.
17 wins in 22 races, wasn't it? The 196 won 5 of its 8. I'm pretty certain it retired from the other 3. So it would have been incredibly dominant in that regard as well. And of course, we're not just asking for dominant Formula 1 cars, we're asking for iconic Formula 1 cars.
Exactly, yeah.
We're still talking about that Mercedes nearly 70 years later. Of course, the RB18, don't get me wrong, is special, and I'm sure it will be spoken about in the future. But this was Mercedes' first F1 car, and of course, the fact they then went away after the Le Mans disaster and came back in 2010, and of course, we saw then the dominant run they had as well then. The W196 is iconic, isn't it? Surely.
Yeah. It has to go through for me.
We will put that through then in round 1. Up next then, Jamie, I feel like this one again, I mean, all of them are quite difficult and potentially controversial to go through. We are pitting the 1975 Ferrari 412T against the 2020 Mercedes W11.
Yeah, I would need to look at some numbers for the 75 one, to be honest, but I would struggle to look beyond the 2020 Mercedes. That was just incredible. Like, the gap they had at the end of a regulation cycle, it had been going, 2017 was the last major rule change. So to come out 4 years into a regulation cycle and be about a second clear at most tracks was just ridiculous. Like, the qualifying at Silverstone, I remember it, which is a minute 28-ish, maybe like 90 seconds lap, and they're a second clear of the next fastest car over a 90-second lap. It's just insane. And I think if that was, obviously it was a cut short season because of the COVID pandemic, but if that season had gone to a typical distance, you'd be talking about so many more records. And you think, like, the races they didn't win that year, obviously 70th anniversary was kind of ridiculous tyre wear, of which we don't see it too often at all. And then what else was there? There was obviously Sakir, they basically threw. And what other race didn't they win?
Abu
Dhabi.
Jamie, no!
What's happened?
I've lost recording. What's it doing? Oh no, it's just my webcam. Give me 1 second. Sorry.
Okay, well, the podcast has improved for a second while we can't see Matt's face.
Yeah, well, we're okay.
I'll carry on my monologue before I was rudely interrupted.
Please do. Sorry.
Yeah, so obviously 70th anniversary and Sakir, it was tyre wear, and then they just threw it for fun to show how good Hamilton was. And then what was the other race of Abu Dhabi when Hamilton was still dying and Bottas is Bottas. So yeah, the fact that they very easily could have had a 100% record of wins is just ridiculous. So I can't look beyond that. And but you want to tell us about 75 Ferrari real quick?
There were. I mean, I was going to talk about the W11 very briefly as well, but I will talk about that in just a moment. Of course, the other big things, like we said with the W11, the DAS system on it, was absolutely crazy. I still remember, of course, because I feel like that W11 came at the right time, didn't it? After Formula 1, we hadn't had anything going on until June. I still remember, and I know it was only less than 3 years ago, but I still remember vividly those Mercs coming out in Austria. And I know someone had edited, the Death Star music from Star Wars. And it just fitted so perfectly.
Yeah.
Because that car was ridiculously overpowered. I think it's often a shame that, of course, that Hamilton only got 16 races in that car. Because 2020 should have been the year that, Hamilton... That should have been Hamilton's comparison year, with Schumacher's 2004 or 2002. Or Verstappen's 2022. That should have been the year that Hamilton gets all those mega stats. And, of course, couldn't quite get them because of, obviously, of COVID and, the fact he had COVID. Talking of the Ferrari, though, Jamie, of course, like we said, steered Niki Lauda to his first Formula 1 World Championship. I'm trying to remember his teammate just quickly.
Clay Regazzoni?
It was Clay Regazzoni, wasn't it? Yeah, you're spot on.
My knowledge of Rush is unreal. Year.
So, unfortunately, Clay Regazzoni took no pole positions in the car. In a 14-race campaign, Niki Lauda took all but 5. So, very, very good in that regard. However, over those 14 races as well, he took 5 wins with a further 3 podiums. Clay Regazzoni took 1 win with a further 2 podiums. So, it wasn't the completely dominant car for both drivers. But we've also got to remember that he was going up against Emerson Fittipaldi, and Lotus back then were absolutely incredible. But if I remember correctly, Ferrari, they did squeeze out the Constructors' Championship as well. But what was even more fascinating about that was the fact that every other team in the entire grid was Ford DFE powered that year.
That is pretty incredible. Actually.
Ferrari were the only team not powered by the Ford DFE, and they still were able to win.
Yeah, which is really treading your own path completely. But as we were just saying, I think that Mercedes probably has to win. And we look like such fanboys of Mercedes, and I'm wearing a German football shirt. I'm not a Mercedes fan, I promise. But the first 2 rounds, I think we have to go with them.
Yeah, I think in Mercedes is fair there, and of course, I think the last other little thing, wasn't it, was of course, everyone talks about how cool that car looked in black, but also the meaning behind why it was black as well, I think goes more to its iconic status than, a lot of the on-track performance of that car as well. The fact it was there to prove a point as well, I think is quite important.
Yeah.
Next up, though, Jamie, it's the other Mercedes. We've had all 3 Mercedes in the first 3 groups. This time round, it's the Mercedes W07 against the Benetton B195.
I'm concerned it's going to be 3 out of 3 off the bat for Mercedes. I think I really like it. 2016 is probably my most underrated season. And if I was to pick a season to rewatch basically on repeat, I could happily rewatch that. The storyline was incredible, the outcome was incredible as a Rosberg fan, and yeah, just the amount of wins they got, kind of like the 2020 car. They didn't take the win in Spain when Hamilton took out Rosberg, and
other way around, but yeah.
I was bait, but it was a 50-50. And the other one was Malaysia when Rosberg got blown up by Vettel at turn 1 and Hamilton had an engine failure from the lead. So they obviously, when you make the fastest car, yes, it's going to win most races, but they were on to win every race apart from when like they self-destructed completely.
It's still the
incredible.
most wins for a team in a single season at 19 as well.
It's it's the second highest rate of all time.
Yes, yeah, second highest rate of all time as well. Just under just over. Just under 90. No, it is just over 90%.
Races,
Sorry, I'm going to keep messing myself up there. It's just over 90% win rate, if I'm not mistaken. 90.9.
90.5, yeah.
90.5, sorry.
Yeah. Just on the maths.
It goes up against the Benetton B195. Now, again, I mentioned this when I did the poll originally. It was a toss-up between the B194 and the B195. I put the B195 in because it didn't have a controversial ending to its Formula 1 World Championship. Schumacher absolutely dominated 1995, of course. Went on to win his second world title. Williams just didn't have an answer for him. I mean, Damon Hill came P2, 33 points behind, and this was, of course, back in an era where there were 10 points for a win. They did trade wins away from each other early on in the campaign, but then, really from the second half onwards, unless he had a big issue, Schumacher basically won pretty much every race, with the exception of Australia, where he retired, Italy, where he retired, Hungary, where he came P11, and Silverstone, where he retired as well, and then also the Portuguese Grand Prix, he came second to David Coulthard.
Interesting. And his teammate was Johnny Herbert, I believe.
His teammate was Johnny Herbert, who took the win at Italy and the win at Britain as well.
Yes, and 2 other podiums. But interestingly, they didn't win the Constructors by a lot. But I do think that's probably more down to the strength of Williams drivers versus Johnny Herbert.
Yes.
Compared to like Coulthard and Hill at that time were probably both like very capable race-winning drivers. Probably could have both maybe won a championship in their career. Obviously Hill did, Coulthard didn't, but Johnny Herbert didn't really ever get up to much in his career, to be fair. This car is pretty iconic. I think just in terms of looks, it's one of my favourites of all time, just because of the colour scheme, the shape of it is really nice, basic stuff like that, and obviously the Schumacher helmet inside for his second championship is pretty iconic. But then both of these are, and I think I have to back the Mercedes again, which is poor, but it's also the car I won my first league racing season in, so that also helps.
Okay, I mean, I think this is the thing, isn't it? We're talking about a very, very good Benetton against a basically on. I mean, you forgot to mention the caveat, of course, that the Mercedes wasn't the quickest car every weekend that year. It shouldn't have won the Monaco Grand Prix, but of course still did, thanks to Red Bull's botched pit stop for Daniel Ricciardo. But yeah, I mean, it is one of I think for many people, because of course we've seen so many very strong years of Mercedes domination. Because it wasn't dominated by one driver, 2016 is kind of forgotten for just how ridiculously OP that car was most weekends. Of course, it was the third year in that development cycle as well. But in Mercedes, after Ferrari had been a bit closer in 2015, they just no one really got a look in 2016.
No.
Next up, though, Jamie, this one... this one's going to be interesting. I mean, I've said that about every single one so far, but still. Brawn versus F2002.
Yeah, this is real, like, nostalgia vibes going on for us, I assume, because 2009 is probably the first F1 season I vividly remember all of, because obviously when you're growing up watching the sport, I was 9 years old at the time. There's so many good memories from 2009. The field spread. I was watching a video actually on field spread generally.
Was it on the race?
On the
recently?
race.
Yep, I've seen the same one.
And what it was like, the whole field was within like 1.3%,
wasn't it? Or something, Matt? It was one of the closest, because of how unpredictable everything was. Yeah. It was one of the closest field spreads of all time. But that isn't what we're discussing.
No, it isn't. But the Brawn as well, just the story behind it. Ross Brawn bought the team for £1. £1 and then won the world championship in a car with no sponsors, no real paint scheme apart from just painting a few accents on it, which looks incredible. 2 drivers who probably would never have thought they were going to be in a championship fight the year before, and against all odds really came out on top against the might of McLaren and Ferrari and the rising stars of Red Bull at the time, with Sebastian Vettel of course. So in terms of iconography, I the brawn is very, very high, but also the F2002 is just ridiculous. Like, the numbers they put up that season was one of the most dominant of all time. It turned people off of Formula 1 at the time, which I think is hard to go up against.
I think this is the crazy thing, isn't it? We sort of, that Ferrari was the pinnacle of Ferrari, the height of their powers, absolutely dominant. You know, Schumacher got a podium in every single race that year in that car. Of course, he used the F2001 for the first couple of races, but we're not going to worry about that. You know, the F2002 was just on another level and was pretty much, I'd say, you know, it's either this or the 2004 car, isn't it? That Ferrari were pretty much as close to building the perfect race car they could. Yeah. But obviously, on the other hand, that Brawn GP car was the perfect race car that should never have existed.
No,
you know, the fact that... it wasn't that dominant. You know, over the entire course of the year, Red Bull actually, in the end, had a quicker car than Brawn. Jensen obviously won, what was it, 5 of the first 6 Grand Prix?
6 out of 7.
Was it 6 out of 7, sorry?
Yeah.
And then never won again. Obviously, Rubens Barrichello picked up a couple of other wins at Valencia and Monza later on in the year. But, of course, every other team had caught up and overtaken them by the summer break.
And Button had 2 more podiums after his run of 6 and 7 wins.
Which is
mad. He got a podium in Monza and a podium in Abu Dhabi.
That was it. That was it.
It really wasn't that fast, but it's iconic. They're both really iconic. But
they're iconic for completely the opposite reasons, aren't they? Yeah. One of them iconic for just completely expected domination, and one of them iconic for the fact that it dominated incredibly briefly but never should have. Of course, helped by the double diffuser. Let's not forget.
Oh, yeah.
Special shout out.
Yeah, shout out to double diffuser and the 0 upgrades throughout the year as well. I think, I'm just looking at the 2002 standings. Schumacher
wrapped it up at France, wasn't it? Yeah. And he would have won the Constructors' Championship by himself, if I remember correctly.
So he got double the points of Barrichello and almost 3 times the points of the next non-Ferrari driver.
It was sickeningly OP.
Which is ridiculous.
However...
that's the equivalent of, like, I don't know what this year, how many... Leclerc must have finished at around 350.
That's the equivalent of Leclerc having 230 points come the end of the year to Max's 460. And then George Russell or Perez finishing 3rd with, like, 170 points.
Yeah.
Just let's quickly as well remember, Jamie, on the other hand, of course, the Brawn GP was controversial because of its double diffuser. The F2002, of course, being controversial because of Austria.
Well, that wasn't the car's fault, was it?
It wasn't the car's fault, but of course, got to be remembered, got to be taken into consideration.
And they gave Austria back at USA, so it's fine.
Did they mean to, though? That's always the question.
Schumacher did.
Are you sure?
Well, he claimed it, so I'm going to...
Of course he claimed it, because he would look like a right mug if he said he didn't mean to. I'm going to completely let you decide this one.
I think the Ferrari edges it.
Okay.
But it saddens me because I love the Brawn.
Yeah, it's difficult to fight against that Brawn, but also then we would effectively put near enough 4 Mercedes car through. Oh, okay. It's the Battle of the V10s up next, Jamie. F2004 versus MP4-13.
1998.
This was 1998. Mika Hakkinen's championship winner. Of course, came off the back of a couple of years of Williams winning, and of course won the final race in 1997 to take his debut Formula 1 win. 1998 was kind of a wild year for Formula 1. We had the V10 engines, we had grooved tyres, and still no traction control. This thing was leery, but Mika did steer it to an incredible first world title.
Yes, and the 98 season for Mika was so much better than the 99 season.
Yeah, the 1999 one was not great.
No, and he completely was pushed to the absolute limit by Michael Schumacher, and I think Hakkinen is probably Schumacher's most respected rival.
Absolutely.
Self-admitted. So, and the livery on this is insane. It's so nice. And the McLaren, the West livery with the names. Does it have names on the side, this one, or was that a bit later on?
I believe it just had the West on the side still at this point.
Yeah, but it's insanely nice. Obviously, you've got that, probably one of the most iconic overtakes in Formula 1 history. On the inside. Yes? 98 Spa?
No. Jamie, 1998 Spa was the one Damon Hill won.
2000
You're thinking
Spa.
of 2000 Spa.
Yes, I am. Never mind. That was a couple of years later, and also it's not as iconic as Turn 5 of Abu Dhabi in 2021. But yeah, I do think this car is insane. Did it? It did win the constructors as well. Yes,
it did win the constructors
as well. The teammates, Coulthard was third, Irvine for Ferrari was fourth. So I guess both drivers won their respective battles against the Ferrari drivers that year for McLaren.
Yeah.
But up against the F2004, I think it struggles, to be fair.
Yeah. The F2004, of course, Michael Schumacher should have won, what was it, 13 Grand Prix in a row?
13 in a row.
Had he not been taken out of Monaco?
Yes, and that is a record. I mean, obviously it's a hypothetical record because he didn't win 13 in a row.
No.
But
that
had
would have
he,
destroyed any Formula 1 record. Yeah, 13 wins in a row at the start of a Formula 1 year is just well, I mean, I say at the start of the Formula 1 year, that's basically the entire Formula 1 year. Of course, only really got stopped when Kimi Räikkönen and McLaren, Kimi at Spa, of course, in that era was magic. And obviously McLaren and Williams, they'd fought so hard in 2003. To be honest, the F2004 was kind of a bit like Red Bull's RB18, wasn't it? In the sense of it came after a mega title battle when you expected a team to potentially drop the ball, and it was all their rivals that did instead. But yeah, the F2004 absolutely dominant. Mika Hakkinen, of course, this was definitely his much better Formula 1 World Championship. Mika Hakkinen.
Oh, sorry, you're back on the first car.
I'm back on the first car. Yeah. But you can't. I mean, the F2004 is still, for so many people, the most iconic Formula 1 car of all time. Whether it will be today is a different question. Next up, though, Jamie, Red Bull RB9 versus Williams FW14B.
2013 is another season that I think is very underrated. Until Pirelli ruined it by giving Red Bull OP tyres.
Yeah.
But against the Williams, which was basically cheating against the rest of the field. It wasn't
cheating. It was just arguably to this day still one of the most advanced Formula 1 cars of all time. It was
so ahead of its time. It was unbelievably ahead of its time.
So that is the car, just for those of you that are watching or listening, that you may have seen the clip before of, I can't remember which driver it was, put it in a gravel trap, got it back to the pit lane, and rather than, of course, than scooping everything out, this was the Williams F1 car with active suspension, so it just shook. It just moved up and down, side to side, and shook most of the gravel out.
Shook the gravel out. And, yeah, it was one of the most dominant cars in terms of numbers as well. I need to actually...
On raw pace alone, the most dominant Formula 1 car of all time. On average, it was 2.5% quicker than any other car on the grid, which is a bit like showing up at Spa in a modern, like in Mercedes 2020 car, and out-qualifying Max Verstappen by 2 seconds or 2.5 seconds.
Yeah.
That's how ridiculously OP the FW14B was. Should have won every race that year but Monaco, had it not been for reliability, and also it was Senna at Monaco.
You can't do much about that, really. They got all but
one pole position, which was Gerhard Berger, if I remember correctly, the British Grand Prix.
Senna at Canada.
No, that was the MP44, sorry, ignore me.
Yeah, Senna at Canada. Got pole.
Yeah.
Mansell got all but 2 poles, Patrese got the other one, and Senna got the other one. So, yeah, it was pretty insane. They did absolutely batter the constructors.
Yep. As you'd hope, with a car 2.5% quicker than anything else.
Yeah.
It was also the earliest, in terms of how many races left, a driver won a world championship, wasn't it? If I remember correctly.
Because Mansell won
with 6 races to go, wasn't it?
6 races to go. Yeah, because he won basically every race up until Germany, which was 6 races from the end, and then only won 1 more, which is quite poor by the standards he set in the first half of the season. But I guess
he was
when
too busy off playing golf.
Yeah, potentially. And yeah, the 2013 Red Bull, of course, was kind of always a little step ahead of the rest of the field up until the start of Sebastian Vettel's record-breaking winning run of 9 in a row from Spa onwards. So, I think the first half of the season, which would have been maybe, was it 11 races? I think it's 20 race season overall.
It was 19 race, yeah.
Oh, so 10 races. First 10 races, I think Vettel won 4 of them, and then in the final 9 races, Vettel won every single one.
Yeah,
which is insane, and no one could really hold a candle to him other than
Romain
sometimes his
Grosjean.
teammate, and occasionally Romain Grosjean in a Lotus, which is quite mad. And actually Rosberg put up a good fight, maybe once or twice. But yeah, the car though wasn't the fastest qualifier, I don't think, that year. Although for some reason Mercedes were just ludicrously good at qualifying, and then couldn't hold their tyres together for more than 2 laps. But yeah, it's very hard. It's probably the most iconic Red Bull.
Oh, yeah.
I would argue this or the 2021, just for the amount of controversy and drama that happened that year. But this is probably the most cleanly iconic one.
Yeah.
But I think the history of Williams and the fact that this was 2.5% quicker than anything else that people came up with that year, I think the Williams has to win out.
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult, isn't it? Because, of course, the Red Bull RB9 was therefore dominant because of a rule change that just so happened to suit them really well. The FW14B was dominant because it had ABS, traction control. They'd even experimented with a CVT gearbox, active suspension. You know, some people still say that car is more advanced than Formula 1 cars of today. And, you know, the fact that
gizmos on it, yeah.
The fact we sort of think of Williams now as kind of this not particularly great Formula 1 team. Let's also not forget that 1992 car was also stunning to look at as well.
Yeah.
And I know a lot of people like the RB9's looks, but the not the step nose, but the nose it had on it, and everything like that, of course, don't get me wrong, very, very iconic for the shots at India, for example, where obviously Vettel got out and bowed to it. But I wonder how much more iconic they are because of how much then the rest of his career went. You know, we have to remember these days. I think everyone sort of laughed at and was like, oh, he's going to win another one quite soon. But the FW14B, for me, is an iconic car rather than iconic because of the driver as well in said car.
Yeah, I think we have to go for the Williams there. Apologies to the Seb fans, but you've put the wrong one through. Don't do it.
I haven't done it. Don't worry.
That was close.
It's fine.
That was very close.
R25 versus FW07B.
I will start by talking about the Renault, since that's kind of all I know about.
Okay.
Yeah, the 2005 was the end of Ferrari's winning run, of course. Basically the end of Ferrari up until this point, really. But yeah, people were not expecting it at all. I guess the only caveat here is kind of a bit like 2021. The FIA kind of manipulated the rules to favour a team against the dominant force. So Renault were had a lot of help from the FIA to make a car that could challenge Ferrari, and the rules were basically set up to screw over Ferrari, which is why the 05 season was such a disaster. But the visuals of this car, it was, as I was growing up, it was my favourite car. Weirdly, I chose to support Fisichella rather than Alonso. But the colour scheme, the blue and yellow, was just outrageous. And the V10 engine, the last of the V10s, was incredible. Obviously, Alonso is a lot of people's hero from who grew up at this stage. It's a little bit before our time, I think. But still is absolutely incredible. This was the car with the active nose weight, wasn't it? Which people think was probably illegal.
The mass damper, I thought was the 06 car, to be honest, but you might be right. I can't quite remember off the top of my head.
Let me have a look.
I've just realised as well, sorry, we meant the FW07C. Williams, trying to do research for this, Williams changed around their car names and numbers so often at this point, and none of them made any sense. But this was the 1981 car that steered Nelson Piquet to a World Championship, and what was actually Williams' first ever Formula 1 World Championship as well, of course, with the Fly Saudi colours. A very, very close championship come the end of the year. Now, I don't think going into the final race it was 5 drivers still within a shout, but had there been another race in 1981, it would have been a 5-driver decider. But it was Piquet that won the title by a single point over Carlos Reutemann, 4 points over Alain Jones' teammate, 6 over Jacques Lafitte, and 7 over Alain Prost, which is absolutely mad. So it certainly wasn't a dominant force within the sport there. Piquet took 3 wins across the year against Reutemann's 2 and Alan Jones's 2. But of course, it was the start of a very, very dominant they had periods of dominance throughout the next couple of decades for Williams.
Yeah, equally, the Renault was not that dominant in terms of wins, because the
No.
McLaren drove by Kimi Räikkönen and Montoya that year was probably as
The
quick, if not quicker.
MP425 should have been an iconic, and I mean it still is for a lot of people, but should have been in this poll instead.
Yeah, it's iconic for flying down Nürburgring towards turn 1 with 3 wheels, sadly. But yes, I think this is a very close call. I would edge towards the Renault just because of the iconography. And
I completely agree with you.
Yeah. I don't think the Renault will go all the way, though, to be honest.
No.
It's a bit of a weak matchup compared to some of the ones we've had, but
it
I would back
has
the Renault.
probably been the weakest matchup across the board. But yeah, the Williams, don't get me wrong, very, very cool as well. But there's something about it. There's something about it that it sticks in my mind, but I completely understand it won't for a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
Final group stage then, Jamie. Brabham BT19 versus the McLaren MP4-4.
Yes.
I feel like this one is
an
fairly
whitewash. Yes, it's 1988 McLaren is one of the favourites for the whole thing. It's an absolute heavyweight of F1 cars of all time. The Brabham is cool because it's the only car ever won by the driver that owned the team, which is really cool. Jack Brabham won the championship in his own car, which is very commendable. But that McLaren was insane.
we talk about Mercedes earlier on winning 19 of 21 races, or 2020 they could have won every race there. McLaren in 1988 came 5 laps away from the perfect Formula 1 season. It was only the Italian Grand Prix where, if I'm not mistaken, Senna got I think Prost got taken out and Senna had an engine failure 5 laps from home, which allowed Michele Alboreto to take the win for Ferrari, not long after Enzo Ferrari had died. Whether you want to believe that's was it Gerhard Berger? Was it? Sorry,
yeah.
I honestly thought it was Alboreto that took that win. But whether you want to believe there's potential for some conspiracy there as well is completely up to you. But I mean, the MP4-4 was just, it's one of the only times as well in Formula 1 history it has been the 2 best drivers on the grid going up against each other in the same car.
In the best car.
In the best car. And like we said, 15 out of 16 wins, 15 out of 16 poles, 5 laps away from the basically perfect year. It was just, I think, again, Gerhard Berger that got pole at Britain ahead of them.
That's correct.
And again, one of the best looking Formula 1 cars of all time as well.
Yeah, so apologies to Jack Brabham, but you've been blown out of the water. So
you kind of have there, unfortunately. You did come up against, the MP4-4, that 1998 McLaren sort of whole thing is the kind of thing you get written about in a book that you just wouldn't... But it's kind of like if Messi and Ronaldo had both played at Barcelona together. Is that a fair? Yeah.
Probably, yes. Yeah.
Like just
the unquestionably
sickeningly
2
OP.
best drivers in a team that was ridiculously OP compared to everyone else. So... And they somehow won all the races despite having the 2 best drivers, and we know the fireworks that went on later with those 2.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. This was before everything kind of hit the fan. Also, the title was won by Alain Prost that year, wasn't it, if I remember correctly? Was it Senna?
Call yourself a Senna fan.
Yeah, no, I always get muddled up because for whatever reason I had in my head that Senna won 91 and 92, but I don't know why. It was Senna.
Comments, go get him.
Go get me, please. Go get me. But that was only because, of course, the point scoring system that year allowed drop rounds. Prost did actually score more points over the course of the campaign. It wasn't quite comfortably.
105 to 94.
Yeah.
So 11, more than a race win.
More than a race win, but Senna did have more. He got disqualified at Brazil, first of all. Right. Well, we've kind of done a lot of talking about each of the cars, haven't we?
We can try and rinse through this without. We've done a lot of background.
I think we can hurry up with our quarterfinals and semis and things like that. 196 then, Jamie, versus W11.
These are basically, if you think about iconic Mercedes, these are the 2 that come to mind, I would say.
Yes.
So, I instinctively want to say 2020, but I know how beautiful that 55-56 car was. But I just think maybe it's recency bias, maybe it's just how far F1 has come, but to drop a second on everyone in 2020 when everyone is quite credible as a team is just ridiculous.
and of course the fastest F1 car of all time.
Oh yeah. In terms of lap time, there's nothing going to beat that for a while. So I think I would go with that, which is a real shame because the 55 car is obviously incredible to look at and has massive history. But this is the nature of the game, so we move.
I'm willing to allow Jamie to put that one through. F2002 versus W07.
And yeah, I was saying that I really like the 2016 Mercedes, but it's probably more to do with personal nostalgia, to be honest.
Rosberg finally snookering one away from Lewis.
Getting a championship. My league racing memories all start with the Mercedes 2016 car, which is a big part of my life for the last 6 years. So, yes, I think my head says the 2002 Ferrari, my heart says the Mercedes 2016, but logic will prevail, and I think we'll go for the F2002.
Good man, because I was going to argue with you on that one if you'd said the W07.
No,
F2004 versus FW14B.
Ooh, this could be the final.
This is the evil group stage. This is the evil quarterfinal, sorry.
That is a real matchup of two titans. I would lean towards the Williams.
Okay, I was going to lean towards the Ferrari, to be honest.
I would have thought the other way around based on our previous loyalties.
This is what I'm thinking, though, because now I think you're right.
I think... let me go get this.
I mean, the thing is, I'm sort of thinking, this was the last Schumacher championship car.
True. And we've... there's no other... there is a Schumacher car through already.
There is a Schumacher car through already.
Actually, the fact he was Montoya away from 13 wins in a row.
I think we will get absolutely roasted in the comments.
Let's put the Ferrari through. I back off on what I said.
I think,
which is a real shame because the FW14B is ridiculously iconic.
I mean, we're talking about some incredibly iconic Formula 1 cars here. It's very, very difficult. R25 versus MP4-4. I think this one's slightly easier, isn't it?
It should be, yeah.
MP4-4, isn't it? Gotta be.
And now is where the stuff gets very difficult.
Oh.
These are some matchups.
Mercedes W11 versus Ferrari F2002. The 7th world title for one, the 5th world title for the other. Fastest F1 car of all time versus what I'm pretty certain was the fastest F1 car of all time at the time.
Yes. I don't want to be done by recency bias, but I feel
like the W11... I think if the F2004 wasn't in the other group, I feel like we might have given it...
I'd put the 2004 Ferrari through against 2020 Mercedes. I don't think I quite put the 2002 Ferrari through.
No, I feel like the 2002 wasn't as dominant as the 2004, plus that little bit of controversy around it.
And the fact Mercedes, despite the shorter season, absolutely battered everything.
Yeah.
And also the social awareness it raised for the
exactly
Black Lives Matter, all that kind of stuff. The fact Hamilton won his 7th, the fact they were very few really unlikely things away from winning every race, basically. Yeah, I think it has to be the Mercedes, which announce death in the comments when we just said that.
The problem is, though, Jamie,
I know, I've seen what's coming here. Ferrari fans are going to be out for us.
I think the McLaren MP4-4 deserves to go through.
I agree with you.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, right.
It's a real shame.
Okay, that is interesting. And the thing is, I think for me, like we said, that McLaren was the only time in Formula 1 history we've really had a super team.
Yeah.
Schumacher,
if you could,
Schumacher is well remembered in that F2004, but is that because of Schumacher? Or, I mean, it's so difficult, isn't it?
Yeah. If you think about iconic cars, everything about the McLaren in 1988, if you could pick...
It was the perfect team, the perfect
the two drivers,
the perfect car.
Yeah, and I just think the F2004, despite everything, is just a bit done by the McLaren 1988 because they were 5 laps from winning every race. How can you argue with that?
You can't in our eyes, but that does then I think also give us a fairly easy final for a comment you made a moment ago that I agreed with. because we both said the F2004 would beat out the W11.
Yeah.
So I think that means we've got a winner.
We do, and I'm sure you're pleased as the resident historical McLaren fan.
the Sennerite of the pair of us. Yeah.
Who doesn't know when he won his titles, but yeah.
You might have forgot Hey, you said that the Hakkinen Zonterm Schumacher move was 1998.
That's a less bad mistake. I'm not having that. But yes, the McLaren 1988 does have to be the most iconic.
The
F1
McLaren MP4-4 is the most iconic F1 car of all time. And if I look back through my polls quickly...
Yeah, go look at the poll. I actually want to know the answer.
Well, I haven't got the full confirmation
got the
just
full.
yet.
No.
But I think the McLaren actually lost to the F2004 in the group stage. In my polls, if I remember correctly. Let me just scroll back down. It was the worst group of the entire thing, or like the hardest group of the entire thing. Yep, the 2004 took 50% of the vote. The MP4-4 took 29% of the vote. The Brawn took 13%, and the Red Bull took 8%. There we go.
Wow.
Most iconic Formula One car of all time.
We absolutely disagree with your viewers then.
We do.
But,
we do completely.
Hopefully they don't crucify us too badly in the comments.
No, exactly. Exactly. To be fair, the W11 did dominate its group as well, so there is that going for it. However, no, the F2004 is absolutely destroying the Red Bull RB18 as well in the poll that's just gone live very recently as well. There we go. McLaren MP4-4. It was slightly less controversial than the last one of these we did, but it has been very, very good fun, Jamie. Once again there.
Indeed.
15 out of 16 wins, 15 out of 16 pole positions. Pretty certain it was something ridiculous, like 27 out of a possible 32 podiums as well, which it was just mind-boggling. And like we said, the perfect team, the perfect driver pairing, the perfect and most iconic Formula One car. Thank you all so much for listening. Let us know how badly wrong we've got it down in the comments below. Jamie, as always, it's been a pleasure as well. But I think,
as always, yes.
I think that's going to do us for this week's episode of Knowing Wheel. Of course, we're getting hyped up, ready for the car reveals. We will be back next Tuesday with more. I think we're going to be going back to normal news next time round, because this has probably been the final ever episode of Knowing Wheel based on those results.